About 32 years ago, I was a young businessman looking to make a name for myself. Eager to get ahead in life and grab hold of that elusive beast we all call the American dream. I was hired at a mid-sized firm that specialized in marketing for smaller internet-based companies, what most people refer to as the dot-com boom. I knew where this landscape was going, and I couldn't get enough of the potential I saw for my career. We were in an older building on Wabash Street in Chicago, known as Jewelers Row, and it is one of the older parts of the Loop in downtown Chicago. The building was not the prettiest in the skyline, but nonetheless, I was working in one of the most up-and-coming industries, and in one of the most prestigious cities in the world. Our building did still have a manual elevator though. The building was going through a remodel, and it seemed as though they were going to start putting in self-use elevators. There was still one lone operator left. It was strange. Most of the time I pictured they rode with you, but that wasn't the case. During busy times he ran 2 or 3 lifts at a time, and just sitting at his station taking them to the proper stops. I had assumed that he had memorized some of the faces with what floor they were on, as he seemed a little bit seasoned. As I went up to him, I asked for floor 8. He stopped with a brief pause, held up one finger, and sent up a lift full of older men in suits. I was the lone rider on my lift. He told me that he had ride with me at first because he enjoyed getting to know his tenants in the building, especially somebody as young as myself. The elevator had a chill to it. I figured that there were drafts from the old elevator shaft, but it felt significantly cold seeing that it was August and I was wearing a suit jacket. The lift itself was incredibly slow. By the end of my business career, I had ridden up in lifts that would go 40 stories in 30 seconds. That old elevator was moving at maybe a floor per minute. Maybe it just seemed that way because of my nerves. The old guy's name was Miko, and after a bit of conversation, I noticed that he had a faint European accent. He asked how excited I was for my job, some general questions like my education and so forth. I kept tripping over my words, partially due to the adrenaline, and partly due to the chill inside the lift. Quickly, around the time we had gotten to the 6th floor, Miko said something that stuck. His eyes changed. I don't know how to describe the change. They didn't dilate, change color, or gloss over. Suddenly, Miko seemed as if he was focused on something 1,000 miles away. He said, "Work hard and learn as much as you can. You're going to be thrust into a much larger role much faster than you anticipated." Somewhat taken aback, I asked him to clarify. I must have said, "Excuse me," or something along those lines. And that's when he reached out and touched my wrist. He didn't grab it. It was as if he was feeling for my pulse. He told me, "Your boss is going to die of a massive heart attack in the office. Nobody will be able to save him. And they're going to look to you as the replacement." At this point, I did become sufficiently freaked out. I didn't even know who my boss was. I didn't even know how long I'd be at this job in the first place. I stuttered, trying to nervously laugh it off. The last words I heard Miko speak that day were, "Nothing matters. He's already mine." The elevator doors opened. A whoosh of warm air hit my face, and Miko politely tipped his cap and he nodded. I went to the bathroom and I splashed some water on my face. I figured it was cold sweat. My cheeks actually felt cold to the touch, as if I'd been playing pond hockey in the middle of the winter. I brushed everything off. I had too much to think about before starting my first day. Far too many impressions to make. I entered that door and my life was never the same. The people welcomed me in a warm fashion. There were a couple of new people starting the same day, so everybody started with a meet and greet breakfast with the staff. I met a few of my bosses and a couple of people near my desk. One of the assistants to my second-tier boss sat across the way from me. She turned out to be my wife. My desk mate turned into one of my closest friends, and he was the best man at my wedding. This job was more than a job. It was the biggest component of my life in my 20s. I owed everything to that job. Now you can see why that weird conversation with Miko stuck with me, right? I didn't see Miko again. Not on the old elevators or on the new ones. I figured maybe he had just creeped out a couple other people and he had gotten fired. Maybe he took a long vacation. Hell, he seemed old enough to retire. Maybe he was just playing one last prank on a fresh young pup in the building before sailing off into the sunset. I was wrong. Dead wrong. About 3 years into my career, a couple of my projects had been major hits. I advised an investment into a small and fairly unknown domain company. They made it easy for businesses to purchase a domain to start their own websites and company handles. That business turned into GoDaddy. But that's a different story. I was red hot. I was picking the right investments. I was completing projects ahead of schedule and helping the company rake in the cash. I had already proposed to my bride-to-be. We were planning on using my bonus to cover the wedding. What a simple time that was, when a small yearly bonus could cover the majority of the wedding. I digress. I swore I caught a glimpse of Miko one morning, and just as the elevator doors had closed, I thought I saw his grizzled jaw and dark eyes trying to catch the door from about 10 feet down the hall. I didn't hold the door. Nobody really does that. And besides, I had a meeting. I checked my watch as the lift climbed. Floor 4, Floor 5, and Floor 6. You should have held the door. I turned around quickly. I swear, it was his voice. I noticed the hair on my neck standing up with a slight chill. I was scared to turn back around to face the door. I could feel somebody standing there. I clenched my jaw and I swallowed, and then I turned around. The elevator hit floor 8 and the doors opened. Nothing, nobody, nada. Crazy, you're going crazy. It's what I told myself. It had been a lot of late nights and you're just losing it. I mentally buckled down and I headed into my meeting. I was third up to give my presentation. My best friend was giving the initial warm-up. My boss was addressing budgetary constraints, and I was going to close the investment by outlining the big picture sales. I never got to close the sale. The only thing that did close that day was my boss's left anterior descending artery, also known as the Widowmaker. He grabbed his chest in the middle of a sentence and dropped to a knee and was dead before the medics could arrive. He was only 37. As the medics wheeled out the body on the gurney, I couldn't help but notice the elevator they took him down in was the exact same lift I used on my first day, when Miko gave me that 1,000-yard stare and told me exactly what would happen. And the second half of his prophecy came true a couple days later, when I was promoted to the vacant position. I didn't want it, but it was sort of forced on me. But I really didn't get a say. My second run-in with Miko was about 12 years after my promotion. 15 years entirely after our first and only real meeting. The same building, a newer office, a much different staff. My wife was now a stay-at-home mom with her 2 kids. My best friend had taken a job at her sister office of our company in New York City. Things had changed. I was the old-timer in the office. My hair started to show bits of silver. My dress code was a little more lax and my bag was much more worn down. I called my elevator and was lucky enough to get one alone. Those few minutes of quiet in the morning are a blessing. If you've worked in a big city, you understand. We were now on the 19th floor. Growth in the company got us a much larger space, but the longer ride up got old every now and then. Right as the doors closed, the small jolt of the elevator buckles my knees. I get that instantly familiar cold rush all around me. I look to my right and there stands Miko, not a day older than he was 15 years ago. I can see my breath as I'm breathing and trying to wrap my mind around everything that has happened within a matter of seconds. With almost no transition, Miko is staring directly into my eyes but seems to again be looking right through them. He says to me, "Answer that phone call today. It'll be the last one you get. He's already mine." And just as those last syllables echoed in my head, he was gone. No hat tip this time. No touch on my wrist. Just gone. I convinced myself this has to be a dream or hallucination. It can't be real. The day that I saw Miko was September 11th, 2001. Our sister office was in the North Tower. I watched a plane fly into the tower on live TV. All I could think about was my best friend and if he had gotten out. The entire morning was chaos for anybody involved. People in the city were scared shitless because nobody knew if the planes would be heading towards any of our buildings. The entire nation collectively held their breath waiting for any news at all. I didn't get a phone call until about 4 p.m. that day. The news in the city of New York were still a wreck, but there was my friend calling me, and I was scared to answer. I was so scared to answer because I didn't know if it would be him or a first responder on the other line. I answered with a shaky voice to hear my friend, alive and well. My knees gave out from the worry, but I was happy. Totally 100% happy to hear his voice. I brushed off my weird experience with Miko, chalking it up to some weird vibe that had been in my head. And the next morning I'd woken up by a phone call. It was a New York number. Apparently I was first on his emergency list for the company contact information. My friend was dead. He had gone home, fell asleep, and the stove burned his house down. All the first responders were jammed up from the plane crashes, and they didn't get to him in time. He was a charred crisp of a human by the time they arrived and put the fire out. The weakness in my knees returned, but this time for a few different reasons. All I kept hearing over and over was that phrase, "He's already mine," and Nico's stupid voice. It was hard to keep it together with everything happening at once. I took time off of work, as did a lot of people. I tried my best to put Miko out of my mind. My final encounter with Miko was about 7 years after 9/11. My kids were about 11 and 8 at the point. My wife worked part-time here and there while they were in school. I was still working the same job at the same office at this point. I had absorbed more responsibility and really caught a hold of that American dream, and I ran with it. I was high up in my initial company and was looking forward to being more than halfway done with my career. I walked into my building with a cup of coffee, stepped into my elevator, and I felt a chill. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. I knew who would be standing next to me. I didn't even look. I could smell him next to me. A faint mix of body odor and rain. And that voice he spoke with this time was much deeper, more sinister, almost as if it was a man trying to make his voice more gruff. It had this ominous undertone that felt like somebody else was saying it. "Your family is going to be wiped out by his silver truck. Don't fight it. They're already mine." Followed by this sick laugh, as if a threat to my family was a fucking game. I got off the elevator and instantly called my wife. "Honey, do not send the kids to school. Do not go to work. All of you stay home. Don't question me, just please do it. Whatever you do, don't leave the house. I'm catching the next train home and we will all just have a family day together." I don't dare get into another elevator. I was tired of prophecies and chilled air and that freaking accent. Our office had moved again to the 8th floor, where everything had started. The stairs weren't an issue at that point. 8 flights was worth it not to hear that voice ever again. I caught a train home by the skin of my teeth. In a half hour, I'd be home. It'd be okay. I get off the train and drive furiously back to my house, pull in the driveway and breathe a sigh of relief. Miko wasn't going to predict anything else. The next 5 seconds played out in slow motion. I heard the throttle of a deep engine. I heard some squeals from tires. and I turned in time to see a silver Ford F-250 smash into the side of my house. The truck had jumped the curb and the throttle was pinned down, and the truck had to hit the house going close to 50 miles per hour. My jaw dropped. I instantly went to checking the driver. I climbed the broken pieces of my home and I pulled the driver's door open. The driver's leg was pinned by the steering wheel and the console. He seemed to be in pain, but he was alive. He also smelled like a bar. Fucking drunk as a goddamn skunk. And that was when things pieced together. The silver truck. The silver truck. I felt my stomach turn. Somehow I knew what I was going to see around the front end of the truck. I didn't want to look. Because I realized that I hadn't heard any commotion since the truck had crashed. Not a yell, not a scream, not anything. My wife and kids had been sitting on our couch watching TV. The truck came through at an angle that hit them square on. They were all dead on impact. I'm not going to tell you how my life spiraled after that day. I'm not going to tell you how many nights I thought about just ending it for myself. My life was already over. I kept working past my retirement age. I guess that job was all that I had left. It was the last glimmer of what my life once was. I didn't handle many big cases anymore. I doubt I did much of anything. The company just couldn't fire me or force me to retire. I was a glorified paper pusher, a shell of my former self. And the reason I'm writing this now is because this is most likely my last day here. I'm not coming back to work tomorrow. I'm bringing my stuff back to my apartment. I'm checking out. This morning I saw Miko again. I felt the chill, but I didn't care. I vaguely listened to him. I heard my name. I didn't give a shit. I let him tell his vague story of how I'd die. He told me not to fight it. I interrupted him before he had a chance to finish. I won't fight it, I told him. I'm already yours.